Our universe is vast, but can you picture in your mind's eye the entire group of all the physical objects that have ever existed, both now and in the past? Everything from electrons, protons, helium atoms, cells, people, planets, stars, black holes, even things we don't yet know about. Perhaps this collection or group of physical objects is finite, or perhaps it's infinite. Either way, we can ask this question: why has there been this particular group of things, rather than something else, or nothing at all? If this question intrigues you, then you're in good company. Some of the greatest minds of the past and many contemporary philosophers have asked the same question, and they've presented arguments that start with the fact that these objects exist but didn't have to, and end with the conclusion that some sort of necessary being exists. These arguments are called cosmological arguments, and we're going to look at one particular version that Michael Rhoda offers in his book, Taking Pascal's Wager. If this argument is successful, then it provides evidence that a necessary being like the Christian God exists, thereby raising the chance that Christianity is true. If that interests you, then stick around. We're going to examine this argument much more closely. Welcome back, everyone, to Crash Course Apologetics, where I summarize the works of Christian scholars in a thorough, engaging, and concise way. Before diving into Rhoda's cosmological argument, you'll need to be familiar with some basic philosophical concepts. First, we'll look at what is meant by necessity and possibility. Then, we'll look at what it means to be a necessary being and what it means to be a contingent being. Okay, so what is meant by necessity? Consider list A and list B. What makes these two lists different? Notice that even though all the propositions in both lists are true, those in list A could have been false. A car accident could have ended your life yesterday. Early U.S. leaders could have chosen a different location for the capital, and someone could blow the top 1,000 feet off of Everest, knocking it down to number 2. So these propositions are only contingently true. Now look at the propositions in list B. They are necessarily true. There's just no alternative way reality could be. A person can't now be taller than he or she is now. Once we understand the meaning of the word bachelor, it's guaranteed that all bachelors are unmarried. And similarly, there's no possible circumstance where some things are not made of carbon, and yet everything is made of carbon. How about this proposition? The Allies won World War II. That's true about the past, and there's nothing anyone can do now to make it false. But that's not enough to make it necessarily true. It's still contingently true because there's a way the world could have gone that would have made that proposition false. So a proposition is only necessarily true if and only if it's true and could not have been false. What is meant by possibility then? Well, consider list C and list D. How are these two groups different? The propositions in list D are metaphysically impossible because there is no way the world could have gone and no way things could ever go that would make those propositions true. A proposition is metaphysically impossible if and only if it's not true and could not have been true. By contrast, the propositions in list C are metaphysically possible. 7 may be false, but it could have been true if you'd made different shopping choices in the past. 8 is true, though it could be made false. And 9 is necessarily true. So a proposition is metaphysically possible if and only if it is either true or it at least could have been true. Now that you understand necessity and possibility, we can discuss what it means to be a necessary being and what it means to be a contingent being. Anything whatsoever that exists is a being. Something counts as a contingent being if it exists but does not have to exist, meaning its non-existence is metaphysically possible. Something counts as a necessary being if and only if it exists and has to exist, meaning its non-existence is metaphysically impossible. My computer, the tree outside my window, and the earth itself are all contingent beings. Reality didn't have to include them in the same way that 1 + 1 has to equal 2. So the question to ask is this: are all existing things contingent? Rhoda's cosmological argument gives us a good reason to think the answer is no. From the fact that there are contingent beings, this argument shows that there must be at least one necessary being to causally explain the existence of contingent beings. Now, why do we need an explanation of contingent beings? Well, if I showed you an empty hat, then pulled a rabbit out of it, you'd be curious to know how I did it. You'd want an explanation. But suppose I said, no trick, it just popped into existence. Would you believe me? Probably not. Why though? I think it's because you know that physical things have causes. Using some of the terms we just learned, you probably have this general insight. Every contingent being has a causal explanation, meaning contingent things can't just pop into existence. They must have some source or cause. There are several good reasons to believe this. First, every single one of the contingent beings in our experience has a cause. If all the crows anyone has ever seen are black, that's a good reason to think all crows are black. It's not a proof, but it's still a good reason. Similarly, since all the contingent beings in our experience have a cause, that's a good reason to think every contingent being has a cause. Not a proof, but still a good reason. Someone might object to this, saying that virtual particles pop into existence out of nothing, uncaused. But that's misleading. When you inspect the details, you find that those particles emerge from a source, or a pre-existing entity, namely an underlying field of energy governed by natural laws. So these aren't really cases of contingent beings popping into existence without any cause. That means yes, all of our empirical evidence indicates that every contingent being has a cause or source. Second, if contingent beings could come to be without a cause, we would expect to occasionally see stuff popping into existence without any cause at all, like elephants just showing up. Why not? It's no harder for a big thing to pop into existence than a small thing, if things really can just pop into existence without any cause. Third, and perhaps the most fundamental reason to accept the claim that every contingent being has a causal explanation, is that this expresses a basic insight. What do I mean by that? What's the insight and what's basic about it? Well, the insight is this. By definition, a contingent being is something that exists but doesn't have to exist. So both its existence and its non-existence were real possibilities. And yet, only one of those possibilities was realized or actualized. So there must be some explanation of why the one possibility was realized rather than the other, why the contingent being exists rather than not. When I say this insight is basic, what do I mean? For many of the things we believe them on the basis of other beliefs. For example, consider belief X. When the hot water heater's working properly, I can get hot water out of the faucet. Say one morning I find that I can't get hot water out of the faucet. I then form the belief Y. Something's wrong with my hot water heater, on the basis of belief X. Not all our beliefs are dependent like this, though. Suppose I believe A, and you ask me why. I reply, because B is true. You ask me why I believe B, so I reply, because C is true. Clearly, this can't go on forever. There's a point that you simply see something to be true, without having to rely on other things you believe as evidence. These kinds of beliefs are called basic beliefs. Examples would be perceptual beliefs, beliefs about logic and mathematics, and memory beliefs. And we have basic beliefs about contingency and explanations too. Here's a real-life example of a basic insight you have about contingent things needing an explanation. On October 23, 1947, the people of Marksville, Louisiana, experienced hundreds of fish falling from the sky. A biologist named A.D. Bajkov happened to be present. He wrote up a scientific paper about the event that was published in the journal Science. Although the weather was calm on the day of that fish fall, Bajkov wondered how exactly the fish got into the air. In his paper, he speculates that several smaller tornadoes that he had observed on the previous day must have lifted the fish high enough into the atmosphere. Whether that's the true explanation or not, one thing is abundantly clear. There must have been some explanation of how the fish got up into the air. They didn't just pop into existence up there. If a bystander had actually made that suggestion to Bajkov, he wouldn't have taken him seriously. Science progresses because we believe that contingent beings have causes, and then we search for those causes. So I think that to deny this basic insight really is to do harm to science. This same reasoning applies not just to individual beings, but groups of beings as well. If I showed you an empty box and then pulled a whole heap of rabbits out of it, you would still want an explanation. It's no easier to pull a heap of rabbits out of an empty box than it is to pull a single rabbit out of an empty hat. And we can apply this same reasoning to the group of all the contingent beings that have ever existed, both now and in the past. Imagine every single contingent being that has ever existed in the history of reality. The rectangles represent things, and the arrows represent causation. Even if there's an infinite number of contingent beings, some causing others, extending back into an infinite past, the whole group is still contingent. It could have been that none of those beings existed, or some other group of contingent beings existed. And so there must be some explanation of why this particular group of beings have existed rather than some other group or not at all. I think an illustration will help us to see exactly why. Female boas are able to produce healthy female offspring without any involvement from a male. Now imagine that the universe had always been here and that there had always been boas, stretching back into an infinite past. We can still ask whether that whole group of boas is itself contingent. Consider the daughter boa. It's contingent because it didn't have to exist. Reality didn't have to include that daughter. Now consider the group of the mother and the daughter boa. That group of two is just as contingent as the daughter alone. It's not as if a reality without those two boas is impossible. Now consider the group of the daughter, the mother, and the grandmother. That group of three is just as contingent as the first boa. Here's the point. A larger group of contingent beings is no more necessary than a smaller group of contingent beings. It's not as though by adding enough contingent beings together, you eventually get a necessary group. Contingency isn't like weight, where you can take one light thing and add it to another light thing and add it to another light thing, and continue this process until eventually the whole group of things is heavy. Not all properties are like lightness in weight. If you have many red bricks and you stack them on top of each other to make a wall, the wall is red, just like the individual bricks. Since every brick is red, the wall is red. Contingency is like redness, not like lightness in weight. Go back to the case of the infinite series of boas. The mere fact that the snakes are unlimited in number wouldn't magically make a reality without boas an impossible reality. You still have to explain why there's a group of boas at all. And saying that you can explain how each individual boa got there, being caused by its mother, isn't sufficient. Because again, there didn't have to be any boas at all. And there didn't have to be that particular boa at all. Now replace in your mind the group of boas with the group of all the contingent beings that have ever existed, both now and in the past. Protons, people, planets, etc. Since every member of the group is contingent, the whole group is contingent. This means there were at least two possibilities for how reality might have been. One, the possibility that all the members of the group exist, and two, the possibility that none of the members of the group exist. And only one of those two possibilities was realized. The question is why? Either that group of all the contingent beings has some causal explanation, or it has existed without any cause. But surely it's implausible to think that the whole group has existed without any cause. If we can't even believe that a single rabbit can exist without a causal explanation, why would we believe that a group of trillions upon trillions of contingent beings have existed without any causal explanation? Therefore, the whole group has some sort of causal explanation. But what would this causal explanation be? What would it have to involve? Well, the cause of all contingent beings can't itself be a contingent being. The group we're trying to explain contains all the contingent beings that ever were. If the cause were part of the group, that would mean it would have to cause itself. But that's impossible since it would have to already exist to do the causing. That means the cause of the whole group of contingent beings can't itself be contingent, and therefore it must be a necessary being, or several necessary beings. So Rhoda's cosmological argument looks like this. The entire group of all the contingent beings that have ever existed has a causal explanation. That causal explanation must involve the existence of at least one necessary being. So there is at least one necessary being that provided or played a crucial part in the causal explanation of the entire group of all the contingent beings that have ever existed. There are many objections to this argument though, and I've provided links in the description of this video to address some of the objections that I don't have time to cover in this video. We'll just look at some of the more common ones. Objection 1. What caused this necessary being? If this necessary being is God, then what caused God? Response: notice that I didn't say at any point in this video that everything needs a cause. I said every contingent thing needs a cause. Is this just an arbitrary distinction? No, there's a principled reason to think that contingent beings always need causes, while necessary beings don't. Contingent beings always need causes because both their existence and their non-existence were real possibilities. There must be some explanation why that one possibility, existence, was realized rather than the other possibility, their non-existence. But in the case of a necessary being, there never were two possibilities in the first place. A necessary being exists, but it wasn't possible for it not to exist. So we don't need to seek some further reason or cause. Once you have reason to think that a necessary being does in fact exist, looking for an explanation of why is a lot like looking for an explanation for why there aren't any square circles. It's not because no one's bothered to make one. It's because it's absolutely impossible for such a thing to exist. And in the case of a necessary being, it's absolutely impossible for it not to exist. Objection 2. Well, if God can be uncaused, why can't the whole collection of physical things be uncaused? Response: the only way the whole collection of physical things could be uncaused would be for it to be necessary. But that would mean that everything in the universe had to exist, which just isn't true. If your parents had made different choices and never met, you wouldn't exist. And there are numerous other physical things whose non-existence is metaphysically possible. Objection 3. Nothing in the argument shows that there's only one such necessary being. Response: the hypothesis that there's just one is simpler than the hypothesis that there are many. It's usually a good idea to refrain from postulating a large number of additional unobserved entities when the observed facts can be sufficiently explained by just one unobserved entity. This just is the principle of Occam's razor. Objection 4. We haven't seen a reason to think that this necessary being is a person or has intelligence. Response: remember the question we've been driving at here. Why is it that this particular group of contingent being exists rather than some other group of contingent beings, or nothing at all. You can try to answer it with one of two hypotheses. You have the non-intelligent, impersonal, necessary being hypothesis, and the intelligent, personal, necessary being hypothesis. So how would that first hypothesis answer this question? On the non-intelligent necessary being hypothesis, the answer is for no reason at all. By contrast, if an intelligent necessary being is responsible for the group of all the contingent beings that have existed, then there is an explanation for why this particular group exists rather than some other group or no group at all, namely the choice of that intelligent being. To suppose that there is a creator who has made a free choice about what to create provides more of an explanation than to suppose that there has been just one set of contingent beings rather than another for no reason at all. This consideration is far from compelling though, so I'll offer a much stronger reason to believe in an intelligent creator when we consider some additional evidence in the next video on the fine-tuning of the universe for life. To try to put all this in perspective, how exactly does this argument relate to Rhoda's updated version of Pascal's wager? Well, premise 2 of Rhoda's updated wager states that Christianity does have at least a 50% chance of being true. His cosmological argument provides evidence for a necessary being, like the God of Christianity. The Christian God isn't the only candidate, though, which is why we need to examine more arguments and more evidence to build a cumulative case in support of premise 2. That's what we'll do over the course of the next several videos. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to this channel. You'll be notified every time I post a new video. Let me know your thoughts about this argument in the comments below. I really enjoy getting to interact with you all there and learn from you. See you soon.